Is this a test? You think you can buy motherhood the way you buy companies?
A millionaire CEO offered a homeless woman $500,000 to give him an heir, but what she did next shocked him. She was homeless when he offered her $500,000 to bear his heir, but when she looked him dead in the eye and said, "I'll do it, but not for your money," his entire world cracked. He thought it was just a deal, until he discovered the woman he tried to buy was the one sent to destroy him. And when her secret came out, his empire, his heart, and his legacy all went up in flames. Before we start, ask yourself this: if life offered you money for your body, not your heart, would you take it? Stay with me, this one will shake you. Ramsey Garcia wasn't used to hesitation. Every deal he ever made, every merger, every broken promise, happened because he spoke and the world obeyed. But that morning, in the middle of a crowded city street, his world stopped at the sight of a woman who didn't move when others did. She sat by the corner wall, clothes torn, hands resting in her lap, but her eyes, they were alive. No begging, no shame, just pride. He should have walked past, but he didn't. He stepped closer, adjusting the cuff of his suit. "Do you need money?" he asked, voice even, deliberate. The woman, Catherine Roy, looked up slowly, studying him. "Is this a test?" she asked. Her tone wasn't weak. It was steady, the kind that forced even a billionaire to blink. Ramsey's jaw tightened. No one ever looked at him like that. "I'll make you an offer," he said. $500,000. In exchange, you'll give me an heir." People moved around them, unaware that two lives had just collided, one built on ice, one burning from loss. Catherine didn't gasp. She didn't laugh. She just tilted her head. "You think you can buy motherhood the way you buy companies?" For the first time in years, he felt his certainty slip. Then she stood, brushing dust from her sleeve, eyes locked with his. "I'll do it," she said, "but not for your money." Her voice was calm, but something in it carried danger and purpose. Before we continue, think about this. Everyone has a breaking point. What would yours be if survival meant selling your soul? Don't look away. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens when power meets pride. Ramsey handed her his card, fingers brushing hers. A moment so brief it shouldn't have meant anything. But as she turned and walked away, he knew something was wrong. He had made the offer, but somehow she was the one in control. And as fate would have it, that single moment on a crowded street wasn't luck. It was a collision years in the making. Because Catherine Roy wasn't who he thought she was. Not even close. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded far too gentle for what was about to happen. Catherine stepped out into the polished silence of Garcia Industries, every surface gleaming, every corner humming with quiet intimidation. The air smelled like glass and money, cold, perfect, suffocating. Ramsey walked beside her, his stride steady, the kind of pace that didn't ask questions because it was used to giving orders. No one looked directly at him. Every intern who passed lowered their eyes, as if afraid to meet the gaze of the man who decided who stayed and who vanished. Catherine's reflection in the chrome elevator doors almost startled her. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Cleaner now, her hair brushed, a plain gray coat Ramsey's assistant had given her. She looked less like someone surviving the streets and more like someone caught trespassing in another life. They entered a glass-walled conference room. Two lawyers were already waiting, both men in dark suits, briefcases aligned like weapons on the table. One of them stood. "Mr. Garcia," he said respectfully, "we've drafted everything per your instructions." Ramsey nodded once. "Let's proceed." Catherine's pulse thudded. This was it. The moment she'd agreed to, a decision that already felt like a confession. She sat down, her hands resting on her knees as the lawyer slid a document across the table, thick and clinical. He spoke in a monotone, no emotional claims. No personal contact beyond approved appointments. Confidentiality enforced indefinitely. Compensation to be delivered in 3 secured transfers. It sounded less like an agreement between two people and more like a blueprint for detachment. Ramsey leaned forward, scanning each clause without hesitation. "Add a medical oversight clause," he said. "I want a specialist supervising every stage." The lawyer nodded, writing quickly. Then, without pause, Ramsey signed. His pen moved like a blade, swift, deliberate, merciless. Catherine stared at the space where her own signature was supposed to go. Her fingers trembled slightly, and she hated that he noticed. "You're free to back out," Ramsey said quietly. His tone wasn't kind, it was neutral, the voice of a man used to transactions. But beneath that calm, something else flickered, curiosity, maybe even doubt. She met his gaze. "I don't back out of promises." She picked up the pen. The ink pressed against paper, her name forming slowly, each letter heavier than the last. Every stroke carried a memory. Her father's face the day his charity collapsed, the empty house they'd lost, the way she'd whispered at his grave that she'd find the truth one day. And now here she was, sitting across from the man whose company's name was stamped on the documents that had destroyed everything. She didn't mention it. Not yet. When it was done, the lawyer collected the papers and left silently, leaving only the echo of their footsteps behind. For a long moment, neither she nor Ramsey spoke. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the table. A key, sleek, metallic, engraved with numbers. "This will be your residence," he said. "Private security. Everything you'll need is there." She looked at the key, then back at him. "Everything I'll need," she repeated. Her voice softened to a whisper. "Everything except peace." Something shifted in his expression, almost imperceptible, like a crack in polished glass. But just as quickly, he straightened his cufflink and turned away. "My driver will take you." That night, Catherine stood at the window of her new apartment, a penthouse overlooking the glittering sprawl of the city. The skyline shimmered like a million lies stacked on top of one another. Below her, people moved like rivers of light, each one with a story, each one chasing something they'd never quite catch. The apartment was perfect, too perfect. White marble counters, black leather furniture, not a single sign of life. It felt like a museum for someone who'd never lived. She walked through each room, fingertips grazing the cold surfaces, and wondered how a man could own all this and still look so empty. In the corner of the living room, she found a file on the table, an overview of her medical schedule, her diet, her expected compliance. And at the bottom, printed in small, sharp letters, "Property of Garcia Industries." Her throat tightened. She tore the page in half, then again, until the pieces fell like confetti on the marble floor. Ramsey sat in his office long after midnight, staring at the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. He told himself this was just another deal, one of many. Yet something about the way she'd said peace kept echoing in his mind. It reminded him of a time when he still believed in that word. Before his ex-fiancée's betrayal. Before he decided that emotions were liabilities. Before success became armor instead of purpose. He loosened his tie and rubbed his temples, but the thought refused to leave. A woman with nothing had looked at him like he was the one who needed saving. Days passed. Catherine kept to herself. She met with doctors, filled out forms, and played the part he expected, calm, compliant, composed. But at night, she opened her laptop, a cheap second-hand device she'd hidden in her duffel bag, and searched every trace of the Garcia Industries merger that had crushed her father's charity. Each article told the same story: market collapse, mismanagement, bankruptcy. But she knew better. Her father had been framed to protect someone higher up, someone powerful enough to erase evidence. Someone like Ramsey Garcia. Her stomach twisted with anger. But another thought kept creeping in, one she hated. What if he didn't know? What if he wasn't the villain, but another victim of the same system that had swallowed them both? She shut the laptop hard, refusing to think it. This wasn't compassion. This was strategy. She was here for revenge, not redemption. The next morning, Ramsey appeared at her door. He stood in the hallway like he didn't belong there, holding a folder and his phone. "Your test results," he said. She took the folder but didn't open it. "You could have sent these through your assistant." "I could have," he replied. His eyes flicked toward the kitchen where sunlight cut through the blinds. "You've made this place livable." Catherine glanced at the plants she'd bought and the faint smell of soup from the stove. "I don't do well in empty spaces." He nodded slowly, then turned to leave. But halfway to the door, he stopped. "Do you regret it? Signing the contract?" She hesitated. Regret is for people who think they had a choice. Their eyes met again, hers steady, his unreadable. For a moment, it felt like something invisible stretched between them. Not warmth, not trust, but understanding. The kind that only comes from recognizing another person's damage. Then his phone rang. He broke the gaze and stepped out, voice cold again, all business. When the door closed behind him, Catherine exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. That night, she sat on the balcony, knees pulled to her chest, wind in her hair. She could still feel the weight of the pen in her hand, the sound of her name on paper binding her to a stranger. Her mind whispered questions she wasn't ready to face. What if this changes you? What if you can't tell revenge from redemption anymore? Below, the city kept glowing, bright, alive, and merciless. And high above it, in a room built on glass and silence, Catherine Roy wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had already sold something she didn't know she still owned. Imagine sealing your future with a stranger's pen stroke. Could you trust someone who might have ruined your past? Don't look away, subscribe now, because the truth will hurt long before it heals. The rain had stopped by the time the car pulled up to the Glasshaven residences, a high-rise that seemed to scrape the clouds. From the outside, it looked like every inch of it was built to keep the world away. Sharp edges, guarded doors, tinted glass that reflected nothing but power. Catherine stepped out slowly, gripping the strap of her worn bag. She wasn't used to this kind of silence, the expensive kind, where sound itself seemed afraid to echo. Inside, the lobby gleamed like something out of a dream, chandeliers dripping light, a marble floor polished so perfectly she could see her reflection. She almost didn't recognize herself, the woman with clean hair and a new coat, standing in a place where even the air felt rich. The concierge smiled politely but didn't ask questions. A staff member guided her into a private elevator. As it rose, the city fell away, its noise swallowed by the hum of machinery and the faint rush of altitude. When the elevator doors opened, the entire top floor stretched before her, Ramsey's penthouse, her new home. If home was a place without warmth, everything was white and gray, glass, steel, marble. Not a single picture hung on the walls. No family portraits. No flowers. No life. Just perfection and the quiet ache of it. She walked slowly, trailing her fingers over the cold counters, the edges of modern furniture. Even the air smelled sterile, faintly chemical, like freshly cleaned hospitals. In the kitchen, a note sat on the counter. Welcome. Medical staff will visit twice weekly. Groceries are delivered every Monday. Expenses are covered. Do not leave the building without notifying security. RG. No greeting. No warmth. Just rules. Catherine dropped her bag on the couch and exhaled. For the first time since signing the contract, she felt the walls closing in. The penthouse was massive, but somehow, it made her feel smaller than she had under the bridge where she used to sleep. Days slipped by like quiet ghosts. Mornings were medical checkups, blood tests, nutrition briefings, specialists asking questions she answered mechanically. Afternoons were silence. Evenings, she'd walk through the apartment barefoot, the sound of her own footsteps too loud in the emptiness. Sometimes, Ramsey appeared. Never for long. Always with something in hand, a document, a folder, or a question phrased like an order. How are you responding to the supplements? Do you need adjustments to your diet? Are you comfortable? He asked the last question like a man asking if a product met expectations. Catherine would nod, polite, detached. But her eyes always searched his face, wondering how someone could look so whole yet so hollow. He rarely lingered, except when he thought she wasn't looking. Then his gaze would soften, almost involuntarily, tracing the quiet resilience in her movements. She didn't belong in his world, and yet something about her presence unsettled it. It was on the fifth evening that something shifted. She was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, moving like she'd done it 1,000 times. A pan hissed softly, the smell of sautéed garlic and herbs drifting through the air. For the first time, the penthouse didn't smell like emptiness. It smelled human. Ramsey entered quietly, a folder still in hand, his phone pressed to his ear. But his conversation trailed off when he saw her. The sight was unfamiliar. The woman who had walked into his building with haunted eyes was now standing barefoot in his kitchen, cooking like she owned the space. He ended the call. That, he said, voice low, wasn't part of the contract. Catherine didn't turn. She stirred the pan once, calmly. Neither was loneliness. Her tone was so even it disarmed him. He stepped closer, folding his arms. I could have the chef prepare anything you want. You don't need to. She looked over her shoulder. I don't cook because I need to. I cook because I can still choose to. The words hung there, soft but heavy. Choice. Something he'd forgotten was supposed to exist outside a contract. Ramsey said nothing. He simply watched as she plated the food, her hands steady, graceful, a rhythm that didn't belong to this sterile world of glass and control. She placed a bowl on the counter, then another. You should eat, she said. I'm not hungry. She smiled faintly. You look like someone who hasn't been for years. He didn't answer. He just sat down. Dinner was silent. But not the kind of silence that bruised, the kind that whispered of unspoken thoughts. He watched her, how she ate slowly, as if savoring each bite like it was borrowed time. Finally, he said, You're adjusting quickly. She met his gaze. I've learned to adjust to worse. He paused, almost smiling. I suppose that's an advantage. No, she said softly. It's a scar. He leaned back, studying her. She didn't flinch under his stare. He'd spent years in rooms full of powerful people, politicians, investors, women who smiled for what they wanted, but none of them ever met his eyes like this woman did. There was no agenda in her gaze. Only truth. It was infuriating. And magnetic. He cleared his throat. If there's anything you need, let me know. Her response came quietly. Peace isn't on your list of available items, is it? He looked down, caught off guard. She went back to eating. That night, Ramsey couldn't sleep. He walked through the apartment, stopping by the kitchen where faint traces of her cooking still lingered in the air. The memory of her voice replayed in his head. Neither was loneliness. The sentence shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. It reminded him of something he hadn't felt in years, guilt. He thought of his past, the woman who'd left him, the empire he'd built on the ashes of betrayal. He'd convinced himself that control was safety, that emotions were liabilities. Yet now, standing in a kitchen that no longer smelled like emptiness, he began to wonder if safety was just another kind of prison. Catherine, in her room, sat by the window overlooking the skyline. The lights below blinked like stars trapped in glass. She had made her move into his world, but it wasn't without purpose. She hadn't forgotten the file she'd seen in his office, the documents marked Roy Foundation. Every time she looked at him, she saw not the man, but the name, the company, the empire that had erased her father's life's work. Yet tonight, something in her resolve wavered. The man she'd watched at dinner hadn't looked like a villain. He'd looked tired, haunted, and that frightened her more than hatred ever could. Because hatred was simple. But understanding, that was dangerous. Over the following weeks, a rhythm emerged. He'd arrive for briefings, talk about medical progress, then linger in meaningless questions that weren't really about medicine at all. How are you sleeping? Fine. Are you comfortable with the new routine? I've been through worse routines. Her answers were never what he expected, and yet he found himself looking forward to them. Sometimes she'd be reading by the window when he came in, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Other times she'd hum softly while cleaning up, a tune he couldn't place but couldn't forget. He told himself it was observation, curiosity at best. But in truth, he was unraveling. For the first time in years, Ramsey Garcia didn't feel in control. It happened one afternoon when a storm rolled in unexpectedly. The wind howled against the glass walls, rain slashing in sheets. Catherine stood by the balcony door, watching the sky darken. Ramsey entered with his usual composed stride, but even he couldn't ignore the tension in the air, the way thunder cracked and the world outside looked ready to break. He spoke without thinking. "Storms used to scare me when I was a kid." She glanced back. "You? Scared?" He gave a small, humorless smile. "Only of things I couldn't predict." She turned fully now, crossing her arms. "Then you must live terrified." The comment hit harder than she probably intended. His smile faltered. "Maybe," he said finally, "but I've learned to hide it well." Lightning flashed, briefly painting the room white. For a heartbeat, they stood inches apart, two people who had no business understanding each other but somehow did. Catherine spoke first. "For a man who has everything, you look like you've lost more than most." Ramsey's reply came soft, almost a confession. "Maybe that's why I keep buying things. To fill the silence." For a long moment, neither moved. The storm outside screamed. Inside, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before something changes forever. The next morning, the storm had passed. The city was washed clean, sunlight glinting off every building. Ramsey came by again, holding a folder he didn't open. He hesitated at the doorway of her kitchen, watching her quietly as she made tea. Catherine looked up. "You're early. I wanted to see if you're settling in." "I'm surviving," she said, pouring 2 cups without asking if he wanted one. He took it anyway, nodding his thanks. The small act, the domestic simplicity of it, felt strangely intimate. They sat across from each other at the counter, sipping in silence. Finally, Ramsey said, "You've changed the place." "Maybe it needed changing." "Or maybe I did," he said quietly. Her eyes lifted, meeting his. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition, guilt, maybe even hope. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was the start of something neither of them could name, a fragile thread connecting 2 broken people trying to remember what being human felt like. That night, as Catherine cleaned the kitchen, she noticed Ramsey's reflection in the glass door. He'd returned silently, watching her from the hall. "You're making a habit of showing up unannounced," she said without turning. He replied, "You make it hard to leave." Her hand froze mid-wipe. He caught himself too late. "I meant." "I know what you meant," she interrupted softly, still facing the glass. "Just be careful, Ramsey. People like you don't fall, they crash." Her words hung in the air, cutting deeper than she realized. Ramsey's throat tightened, but he didn't argue. He only said, "Good night, Catherine." And as his footsteps faded down the hall, she whispered to the empty room, "Good night, Mr. Garcia." That night, neither of them slept. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why the sound of his voice stayed in her head. He sat by his window, watching the same moonlight spill across the skyline, wondering when his life, his perfect, controlled existence, had started to feel like someone else's story. Somewhere between silence and storm, between distance and understanding, 2 strangers had begun to share more than a contract. They had started to share the quiet ache of being seen. The morning began quietly. Sunlight streamed through the glass walls of the penthouse, glinting off silver appliances and polished marble floors. Catherine stood by the window with a cup of tea, her eyes tracing the city skyline. From up here, everything looked peaceful, too peaceful. It was a lie of perspective. Every tower below had been built on something: sweat, sacrifice, and in some cases, destruction. She wondered how many dreams had been buried so that men like Ramsey Garcia could stand tall. Behind her, the faint sound of footsteps broke the silence. Ramsey appeared, already in his suit, crisp and unbothered. He checked his watch before glancing her way. "I have to head out early today. Board review." She nodded without looking at him. "Another empire to tame?" He smiled faintly. "Empires don't tame. They consume." That, at least, was honest. He walked to the table, gathering papers into a neat stack, his movements sharp, automatic. But as he reached for his briefcase, a file slipped free and fluttered to the floor. The moment he turned toward the hallway, Catherine's eyes caught the label stamped in bold black letters. Roy Foundation, Merger Dispute. Her blood turned to ice. She froze, the teacup trembling in her hands. It couldn't be. Not here. Not that name, her name. When the door closed behind him, her breath came in short, shallow bursts. She set the cup down and knelt, picking up the file as though it might burn her fingers. She flipped it open. The first page was an internal report, dated years ago. Her father's charity name sat in the header, alongside corporate terms she barely understood: acquisition rights, asset seizure, liability transfer. Her father's signature appeared near the bottom, marked with a red X and the word terminated. Her chest constricted. He hadn't known what he'd signed. They'd used him. And here it was, proof of the empire that had devoured his life, sitting on a table in the apartment of the man now paying her to bear his heir. She closed the folder slowly, hands shaking. The silence in the penthouse felt unbearable, too large, too perfect, too full of ghosts. She sat at the kitchen counter, staring at the file. Every instinct screamed for her to confront him, to throw it in his face and demand answers. But that would be foolish. Premature. If there was one thing she'd learned from years of surviving on nothing, it was patience. You don't strike until you know exactly where to aim. So instead, she turned on his laptop. It wasn't locked, because of course, men like Ramsey didn't believe anyone would dare touch what belonged to them. The desktop was immaculate, every file labeled, every folder organized. She found a directory labeled Archives, Mergers, Old. Her pulse raced as she opened one file after another. Names flashed across the screen: board members, subsidiaries, charitable trusts. And buried deep, one labeled Victor Holdings. She clicked. The documents inside showed internal transfers between Victor Holdings and Garcia Industries around the same time the Roy Foundation collapsed. Millions moved silently. Accounts opened, then closed. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't incompetence. This was theft. Someone had deliberately funneled her father's assets into the merger, and then let him take the fall. And now she was living in the penthouse of the man whose name stood at the top of every signature page. When the front door opened that evening, she snapped the laptop shut and slid the file back into place. Ramsey entered, exhaustion etched into his face. His tie hung loose, his hair slightly disheveled. For the first time, he didn't look like the unshakable titan of his own legend. He looked human. "You've been quiet lately," he said, setting his keys down. Catherine forced a smile. "Maybe silence suits your place." "Doesn't suit you," he said, surprising her. "You're not the quiet type. You think too loudly." She chuckled softly. "Is that your professional diagnosis?" He shrugged, eyes softening. "Just an observation." He walked past her, setting something small on the counter. It glimmered under the lights, a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm. "I saw this at a shop earlier," he said awkwardly. "Figured it might be, good luck." Catherine stared at it. Of all the gifts a man like him could buy, this one felt too small, too intimate. "Good luck," she echoed. "You don't strike me as someone who believes in luck." He hesitated, his voice low. "No. I believe in choices. But sometimes, we don't get enough of them." That stopped her. Because behind those words, there was something unspoken, something almost broken. She picked up the bracelet, letting it dangle from her fingers. "Then why give this to me?" "Maybe," he said, meeting her gaze, "because I want to believe someone still can." Her heart faltered. For a second, the lines between enemy and stranger blurred. For a second, she forgot what she was supposed to feel. Then she remembered the file, the name, the signature, the ruin. She slipped the bracelet onto her wrist anyway. "Thank you," she said softly. But inside, her resolve hardened like steel. If he was guilty, she would find out. If he wasn't, she would still make him face what his empire had done. Later that night, long after he'd gone to bed, Catherine sat alone at the kitchen table, laptop open, city lights spilling across her face. Her fingers moved quickly, tracing digital footprints, compiling screenshots, cross-referencing financial trails. The deeper she dug, the more the puzzle rearranged itself. It was bigger than her father's charity. Dozens of small organizations had been swallowed up and quietly erased, all under the same merger cycle. She found one recurring name, Victor Ashcroft. A silent partner. A ghost behind every document. And the second signature on every agreement Ramsey had ever approved. Her anger flared. Maybe this Victor had done the real damage, but Ramsey had let it happen. He'd built his empire on it. By dawn, she sat back, eyes burning, the bracelet glinting on her wrist like a cruel reminder. She whispered to the empty room, "You'll pay for what you did, Mr. Garcia. One way or another." The next morning, Ramsey joined her at breakfast, coffee in hand. The air felt different, sharper somehow, like both of them were carrying secrets neither dared name. He looked at her across the counter. "Did you sleep?" "A little." "You were up late," he said casually. "I couldn't stop thinking," she replied. "About." She met his gaze, her tone light. "About why people like you always look lonelier the higher they climb." He blinked, caught off guard. "Is that a question or an accusation?" "Neither," she said. "Just another observation." He smiled faintly. "You think too loudly again." Catherine looked down at the coffee in her hands, swirling the dark liquid slowly. "Maybe I'm just learning to hear myself again." There was silence after that, not awkward, just fragile. Like both of them were standing on opposite sides of the same wound. That afternoon, while Ramsey was out, she found herself standing in his office again. The same desk. The same files. But now she wasn't looking for proof. She was searching for certainty. Was he really the man who'd orchestrated it? Or had he inherited the guilt of others? Her hand brushed against a framed photo tucked behind the monitor, an image of Ramsey with another man, shaking hands. The caption read, "Garcia and Ashcroft, the future of global expansion." Her chest tightened. There it was. The other name. The shadow she'd seen in the files. Victor Ashcroft, the man behind the fraud that ruined her father's foundation. Her mind raced. If Ramsey was connected to him, maybe he wasn't the monster she thought, or maybe he was too blind to see the monster beside him. Either way, she was running out of time to decide which truth she could live with. That evening, Ramsey returned early. He found her sitting by the window again, staring at the bracelet. "You don't like it," he said quietly. "I didn't say that. You keep turning it like you're trying to find a flaw." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just wondering what kind of man buys luck for someone who doesn't believe in it." He hesitated. Maybe the kind of man who's starting to wish he did. Catherine's heart thudded painfully. For a moment, the air between them felt charged, not romantic, not yet, but heavy with something unspoken and dangerous. Because she knew if she kept standing this close to him, she might forget why she came. And forgetting would be worse than any revenge. When you hide revenge behind a smile, remember, it always costs more than forgiveness. Subscribe now if you believe even justice can turn into love. The clock in the penthouse ticked softly, its rhythmic sound swallowed by the stillness of midnight. The city outside pulsed with distant life, faint car horns, the hum of traffic, and the occasional flicker of lights far below. But up here, in Ramsey Garcia's world of glass and order, time felt suspended. Catherine stood barefoot at the threshold of his study, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the silence. She had waited until the entire apartment went still, until the faint creak of floorboards told her Ramsey had gone to bed. Now, under the pale wash of moonlight, she slipped inside. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Every item was meticulously arranged, the kind of space that reflected the man himself, controlled, deliberate, secretive. But tonight, she would break that control. She sat at his desk, her fingers trembling as she powered on his computer. The screen glowed softly, illuminating her face. Her pulse spiked when she saw it required a password. She closed her eyes, recalling what she'd learned about him these past weeks. His habits, his routines, the little contradictions that made him human. She typed, Ava. It was the name of his late sister. She'd seen it once engraved on a bracelet tucked in a drawer. The computer unlocked. Her breath caught. Folders stretched across the screen, labeled archives, financials, personal, Victor. That last one made her pause. She clicked it open, and there it was, a chain of encrypted files labeled merger_09, Roy Foundation audit, Ashcroft_litigation. Her chest tightened as she opened the first document. Lines of numbers, transactions, names. She skimmed faster, eyes darting from one date to the next. Then she froze. Her father's name appeared, Harold Roy. Beside it, asset transfer authorized by Victor Ashcroft. Another document followed, a memo, unsigned but clear. Mr. Roy's charity will be used as a shell to consolidate losses from the Ashcroft merger. Once dissolved, redirect assets through Garcia Industries' charity arm. Keep Garcia uninformed until the final audit is cleared. Her hands flew to her mouth. Keep Garcia uninformed. Her mind reeled. She read it again and again, until the words blurred through tears. All this time, she had blamed the wrong man. Ramsey hadn't destroyed her father. He had been used, just like her family. She slumped into the chair, shaking. The truth she'd hunted for months didn't free her, it shattered her. Her father's ruin wasn't Ramsey's crime. But her own deceit, accepting the contract, lying to his face, that was. A soft sound behind her made her jump. The study door creaked open. Catherine. His voice, low, disbelieving, dangerous. She turned slowly, her pulse hammering in her throat. Ramsey stood in the doorway, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, eyes dark with confusion and something colder, betrayal. "What," he said quietly, "are you doing here?" She rose to her feet, the monitor's glow painting her in pale light. "I needed the truth." His gaze flicked to the computer. His expression shifted, disbelief to realization, realization to fury. "You went through my files." "I had to," she said, voice trembling but steady. "You wouldn't have told me." He stepped forward, each movement deliberate, restrained. "You think breaking into my study gives you the right to?" "Yes," she cut in, the word ripping out of her. "Because you built your fortune on what you took from others. From my family." He stopped dead. "Your family." Her breath came unevenly. "My father was Harold Roy." The silence that followed was a living thing, tense, electric. Ramsay stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The Roy Foundation? She nodded, tears spilling over. You destroyed it. My father spent his last days believing he was a failure. He died thinking he'd lost everything because of you. Ramsay's jaw clenched, his voice low and rough. I didn't know. Don't lie to me, she snapped, slamming her hand against the desk. I found the documents. The transfers, the memos, all of it tied to Garcia Industries. He moved closer, anger flaring behind his calm. You think I haven't seen those files? You think I didn't ask questions when Victor handled those deals? He was my partner, Catherine. I trusted him. Trusted him, she cried. You let him destroy lives while you looked the other way. His hand came down on the desk with a sharp crack. Don't you dare tell me what I let happen. The sound reverberated through the room, the weight of it shaking her to stillness. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ramsay spoke again, quieter, the edge gone from his voice. You're not the only one who lost everything. She blinked, confused. What are you talking about? He sank into the chair opposite her, running a hand over his face. Ava, my sister. She was one of the investors in Victor's expansion projects. When the fraud was exposed, she lost everything. Her savings, her name, her will to live. Catherine's breath hitched. She took her own life, he said flatly. Because of that man. Because of me. I should have seen it. I should have stopped him. The rage in her melted, replaced by something quieter, grief. The same grief she'd carried for years. I didn't know, she whispered. Neither did I, he said. Not until it was too late. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with mutual understanding, the wreckage of two lives crushed by the same hand. Catherine looked down at the glowing monitor, the words on the memo blurring through her tears. So you've been investigating him? Ramsay nodded. For years. Every merger he touched, every account. I've been tracing his web, trying to make sense of it. Trying to undo what he did before he died. Her head snapped up. He's dead. Ramsay's eyes darkened. Car crash. 3 years ago. Before I could confront him. She sat down again, the weight of her revenge crumbling beneath her. So all this time, I hated the wrong man. He gave a small, bitter laugh. You're not the first. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. Catherine closed the files, staring at her reflection on the black screen. Finally, she said, I came here to destroy you. Ramsay's eyes softened. And now? She met his gaze. Now I don't know who I want to destroy anymore. He leaned forward slightly. You came here with fire in your hands, Catherine. Maybe you needed to burn the past to see what was left. Her throat tightened. And what's left? He hesitated, his voice almost a whisper. Two people who lost too much to keep pretending they don't care. She wanted to hate him still, wanted to hold on to the anger that had kept her alive. But looking at him now, she saw not the untouchable billionaire she'd imagined, but a man hollowed out by his own mistakes. A man whose guilt mirrored hers. Catherine rose slowly, stepping around the desk. She stood inches from him now, her voice low and shaking. You ruined my life, Ramsay. Even if it wasn't your hand that signed the papers, it was your world that did it. He didn't flinch. And I've spent every day since trying to make it right. You can't fix the past, she said. No, he whispered. But maybe I can stop running from it. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them pulsed with something raw, not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Catherine turned away first, wiping her tears. You shouldn't have trusted him. He gave a weary smile. You shouldn't have trusted me. They both knew it was true. Ramsay stood, walking to the window. The skyline reflected in the glass, vast and merciless. I built everything to prove I was in control, he said. But control is just another kind of prison. Catherine joined him, her reflection beside his. And revenge is another kind of grief. They stood there, silent again, two fractured souls framed by the city they both despised and depended on. Finally, Ramsey turned to her. What will you do now that you know? She looked down at her hands. I don't know. Maybe start by forgiving my father, and myself. He nodded. Then maybe there's still hope. She looked at him sharply. For what? For both of us. The tension between them shifted, not gone, but changed. He moved toward her, close enough that she could feel the faint heat of his breath. I'm sorry, he said softly, for what my world did to yours. Her eyes met his. And I'm sorry I judged you before I knew. He smiled faintly. Looks like we both made bad investments. That drew a laugh from her, small, trembling, but real. It was the first sound of life between them since the confrontation began. Catherine closed the laptop, setting it gently on the desk. So what happens now? Ramsey took a deep breath. Now? We stop pretending this is just a contract. She stiffened. You said no emotions. No complications. He met her gaze steadily. And you broke that rule the moment you walked into my life. She wanted to argue, to deny it, but the truth was already in the way her heart beat. She turned toward the door, her hand on the knob. Good night, Ramsey. He watched her go, his voice quiet. Good night, Catherine. When the door closed behind her, he sank into the chair, staring at the dark screen. On it, her reflection had disappeared, but her presence lingered. And for the first time in years, Ramsey Garcia wasn't sure whether he just lost control, or finally found peace. The morning after their confrontation dawned gray, muted, and heavy, the kind of morning where even the sky seemed reluctant to face what had happened the night before. Catherine barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ramsey's face, the shock, the anger, the grief. His words echoed in her chest. You're not the only one who lost everything. She had gone to war against a man who wasn't her enemy. And yet, knowing that didn't erase the years of pain, the hunger, the humiliation. Now everything between them hung by a fragile thread, a contract signed in ink, shadowed by guilt. Ramsey stood in his office overlooking the city, the skyline blurred through the morning mist. A half-drained cup of coffee sat on the table beside a torn document, the contract. He'd stared at it for an hour, maybe longer. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. For years, his empire had been his shield, control, precision, authority. But now, the very walls that once protected him felt like a cage. He heard the soft knock at the door before she entered. Catherine, he said quietly, without turning. She paused in the doorway. You asked to see me. He faced her then. His eyes were tired, not angry, just human. I've made a decision. She crossed her arms. About what? He took the torn contract from the desk and slid it toward her. About this. It's over. You can take the money and walk away. You don't owe me anything anymore. Catherine stared at the papers, the neat columns of legal text, the signatures that had once felt like shackles. Her pulse thudded in her ears. You're canceling the deal? He nodded slowly. I started this for all the wrong reasons. I thought I could control life, buy it, shape it, bend it to my will. But you showed me how wrong I was. Her voice was cold but trembling. So now what? You're just going to buy your redemption by tearing up a contract. No, his tone was firm. I'm not trying to buy anything anymore. He opened a drawer, pulled out a bank envelope, and set it beside the torn contract. $500,000. It's yours. Take it, Catherine. Start over somewhere far from all this. She didn't move. The sight of that money, the same amount that had once tempted her, now made her stomach turn. Finally, she stepped forward, picked up the envelope, and pushed it back toward him. "I'm not here for your charity," she said softly. "I'm here because I wanted you to see what your world destroys." He froze, her words hitting harder than any accusation. She continued, her voice low but fierce. "You think money fixes everything, but it doesn't. It buries it. It hides the wreckage under gold and glass until people like you forget who's bleeding beneath it." Ramsey's throat tightened. He wanted to defend himself, to say he didn't know, that he never meant for her father's ruin, that he was trying to change. But she wasn't wrong. For years, he had buried his guilt under profits and press releases. Now, for the first time, someone had forced him to look. Catherine turned away, her hands trembling. "You can keep your empire, Ramsey. But you'll never understand what it feels like to lose everything because of it." He stepped closer. "You think I don't?" "Not like I did," she snapped, spinning back to face him. "You lost money, a deal, maybe even a sister. I lost my father, my home, my dignity. You can rebuild what you lose. I had to survive what you caused." He flinched as if struck. Then he said quietly, "You're right." That silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was raw, unfiltered, and heavy with truth. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer. "You told me once that loneliness wasn't in the contract. Maybe this wasn't supposed to be either. Maybe it was supposed to break both of us." Her chest ached. "Then what happens now?" Ramsey looked down at the torn contract again. "Now I start doing something I should have done years ago, listening." For the first time, he asked her to sit. They sat across from each other at his glass table, the same place where lawyers had once dictated the terms of her body and his legacy. Only now, there were no pens, no contracts, just two people. "Tell me," he said quietly, "about your father." The request disarmed her. Catherine hesitated, then exhaled. He was the kind of man who believed goodness still mattered, even when the world laughed at him. "He started the Roy Foundation after my mother died. He said every child deserved a safe place, no matter who their parents were." Her eyes grew distant. He wasn't perfect, but he was kind. And when the fraud hit, when the money vanished, he didn't understand. He thought he'd failed everyone. He couldn't live with it. Ramsey's voice was almost a whisper. He took his own life. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I found him. Sitting at his desk. The same way you were when I found those files." A sharp breath escaped him. Catherine looked up, meeting his eyes. "That's why I said yes to your offer. I wanted to see if a man like you could ever feel what it's like to lose something real." He didn't answer right away. His hands tightened into fists, knuckles pale. Finally, he said, "Now I do." For a long while, they sat in silence, two ghosts trying to remember what it meant to be alive. Then Ramsey stood abruptly and walked to the window. The city sprawled beneath him, glittering and indifferent. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "what all this means? The buildings, the power, the money. None of it fills the emptiness." Catherine's voice came softly from behind him. "It's not supposed to." He turned, brow furrowed. She continued, "Money doesn't fill holes, Ramsey. It digs them deeper. And the longer you feed it, the further you fall from who you used to be." He stared at her for a long moment, then looked back out the window. "Maybe that's why I found you." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He turned, a faint, weary smile ghosting his lips. "Because you remind me of everything I lost, and everything I could still save." Her heartbeat stuttered. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't turn this into redemption. You can't rewrite what happened." "I'm not trying to," he said softly. "But maybe, we can both start again." She studied him, the sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability behind his eyes. For the first time, the cold CEO facade wasn't there. Only the man beneath, broken, repentant, searching. He took the torn contract, folded it once, and dropped it into the trash bin. "That chapter of my life is over," he said. "Whatever happens next, I want it to be real." Catherine stared at the bin. "And what if I don't trust you?" His voice didn't waver. "Then I'll earn it." Her eyes softened. "You can't buy trust." He smiled faintly. "I know. That's why it's worth something." That night, the apartment felt different. No tension. No pretense. Just quiet understanding. Catherine stood in the kitchen, making tea, while Ramsey lingered by the counter, awkwardly, like a man unused to standing still. He broke the silence first. "You're staying?" She hesitated, stirring the tea slowly. "I don't know yet." "You don't have to," he said. "Not anymore." "I know." He nodded, staring down at the cup she handed him. Their fingers brushed, a brief touch that lingered too long. She looked up at him. "For what it's worth. I didn't expect you to change." He met her gaze. "Neither did I." Later that night, Ramsey walked past the study and paused. The desk was clean now, no files, no contracts, no secrets. Just silence. He sat down and looked at the empty space where his empire used to live. Numbers, graphs, projections, all meaningless now. In its place was something else. A thought. A memory. Catherine's voice. "You wanted to control life. But all you did was cage it." He smiled sadly to himself. She was right. She always had been. And for the first time, he wasn't angry about it. In her room, Catherine sat by the window, watching the city lights blur into the night sky. She should have felt free now that the contract was gone, but freedom didn't feel the way she expected. It wasn't relief. It was emptiness. She whispered to herself, "You wanted him to suffer." But instead he listened. A tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. Maybe she hadn't come here to destroy him after all. Maybe she'd come to be understood. And somehow, against every odd, she had been. The next morning, Ramsey left an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was a short note, written in his precise handwriting. "The past doesn't vanish when we tear up paper. But maybe it begins to heal when we face it together." Catherine read it over and over, her throat tightening. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a pawn in someone else's game. She felt seen. As she looked out over the city, the sunlight breaking through the skyline, she whispered to the air, not to him, not to anyone. Maybe forgiveness isn't something we give once. Maybe it's something we learn to live with. Power means nothing if it can't heal the damage it caused. Don't just scroll away. Think about it. How many lives have you broken without realizing it? Subscribe now, before you forget what real accountability sounds like. The morning light spilled through the penthouse windows like quiet forgiveness. Catherine stood barefoot on the marble floor, her fingers trembling as she clutched the white stick in her hand. 2 faint lines. Her breath hitched. The room around her blurred, the expensive furniture, the panoramic skyline, the faint hum of the city below. None of it mattered. The world had shrunk to 2 tiny pink lines that changed everything. She sank onto the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the test. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, not with fear, but disbelief. She whispered, "It actually happened." The irony almost made her laugh. She had entered this house for revenge, signed a contract to bear a child she thought would symbolize power, not love. Now she was carrying the heir of the man she once hated. Ramsey Garcia's heir. Downstairs, the penthouse was silent except for the rhythmic tapping of Ramsey's fingers against the kitchen counter. He had been up all night reviewing documents for a project he no longer cared about. Numbers. Markets. Profit margins. They all blurred together, meaningless now, like smoke in sunlight. When Catherine appeared at the doorway, pale and hesitant, he looked up immediately. Something in her face, fragile but steady, made his chest tighten. "Catherine," he said softly, "are you okay?" She didn't answer at first. She stepped closer, the small test still hidden in her hand. "I need to tell you something," she murmured. He straightened, instinctively bracing for bad news. "What is it?" Her lips parted, then trembled. "I'm pregnant." The world stilled. For a moment, all he could do was stare at her, words frozen, mind blank. Then slowly he breathed out, "You're sure?" She nodded. "I took 2 tests." Ramsey's hand gripped the counter behind him, steadying himself. 1,000 emotions, fear, awe, guilt, wonder, collided inside him. Catherine waited, uncertain. She had expected indifference, maybe relief. Instead, his expression cracked open with something raw and unguarded. "I don't know what to say," he admitted finally. "You don't have to," she replied quietly. He stepped forward, hesitant. "You should see a doctor. I'll make the arrangements, the best medical team, whatever you need." She shook her head. "No, Ramsey. Not like this." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't want your money, or your protection, or your deals." He stared at her as if she'd just spoken another language. "Then what do you want?" Her gaze met his, steady, clear. "Choice." Later that day, they sat opposite each other in the quiet living room. The sunlight painted their faces gold, but the silence between them felt heavy, unspoken. Ramsey broke it first. "You could have anything you want, Catherine. Security. A home. Complete anonymity if that's what you prefer." Her response was immediate. "That sounds like a prison made of comfort." He blinked. "I'm offering to take care of you." "No," she said. "You're trying to erase your guilt." He flinched, then sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I just want to make things right. Then stop treating me like a transaction." The words hit hard, because they were true. He looked at her, voice breaking slightly. "You deserve better than this. You deserve better than me." Her expression softened. "That's not your decision to make." She rose and walked toward the window, staring down at the restless streets below. "When I first came here," she said, "I thought I could destroy you. That if I gave you a child, I'd be the one in control." Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't stop. "But now, I see it wasn't control I wanted. It was justice. And maybe justice looks different when you finally see someone's heart." Ramsey's throat tightened. "Catherine." She turned, tears glinting in her eyes. "I'll give you an heir. But not because of your contract. Because I choose to." He froze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt alive, fragile and burning all at once. Ramsey took a step toward her. "You don't have to do this." "I know." She smiled faintly. "That's why it matters." He stared at her, this woman who had every reason to hate him, now standing before him with forgiveness instead. His chest ached with something he couldn't control. He reached for her hand, but his fingers trembled before they touched. "You should hate me," he whispered. "Maybe I did," she said softly. "But hate only keeps you trapped in someone else's story. I want my own." He looked down, tears threatening to break through his composure. Catherine stepped closer, her voice low and gentle. "Ramsey, you've spent your whole life buying silence. You thought if you paid enough, no one could hurt you." He nodded slightly, his voice barely audible. "And I was wrong." She reached up, her palm brushing his cheek. "Now you understand. Love isn't an exchange, it's surrender." That was the moment he broke. Ramsey turned away, covering his face with his hands. The sound that escaped him wasn't the composed breath of a CEO. It was a man's quiet collapse, grief meeting grace. Years of buried guilt spilled out in silence. Catherine stood beside him, unmoving, her hand still resting lightly on his shoulder. He whispered, "All my life, I thought control was power. But you," he swallowed hard, "you make me feel powerless in the best way." She smiled through tears. "That's not powerlessness, Ramsey. That's freedom." Later, as dusk fell, they sat together on the balcony. The city glowed beneath them, cars flickering like stars on asphalt rivers. Catherine leaned back in her chair, one hand resting gently on her stomach. Ramsey sat beside her, silent, lost in thought. "I don't know how to be a father," he said finally. She turned to him, her tone soft but firm. "Then learn. The child doesn't need perfection, just presence." He nodded slowly. "And what about you? What about me? What do you need?" She thought for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Peace. Not money. Not titles. Just peace." He looked down. "You deserve that." She gazed at him. "Then help me build it." A gentle wind swept across the balcony, carrying the faint hum of the city. Ramsey looked at her again, really looked, and for the first time, saw not a contract, not a promise, not a debt. Just a woman whose strength made his empire feel small. He reached for her hand. "Thank you," he whispered. She tilted her head. "For what?" "For not walking away. For teaching me what I should have learned long ago." "And what's that?" "That life doesn't belong in ledgers or contracts. It belongs in moments like this." The night deepened, wrapping the penthouse in quiet warmth. Inside, a single lamp glowed beside them as they moved to the couch. Ramsey hesitated before speaking again. "You don't know what this means to me." Catherine's voice was calm. "I think I do. I spent years thinking love made men weak," he said. "But maybe indifference is what truly destroys us." She looked at him for a long moment before whispering, "Maybe we both had to break to find what was real." He smiled faintly, then turned to face her completely. "I'll make a promise, not as your employer, not as your savior, but as the man who owes you everything. I'll never treat you like an obligation again." Her voice caught. "Then we're free." He nodded, tears glistening. "Free." Hours later, after she had gone to bed, Ramsey remained by the window. He placed a hand against the glass, his reflection staring back, not the ruthless CEO, but a man reborn through the eyes of someone who refused to hate him. He whispered into the silence, "You changed everything, Catherine." Down the hall, she stirred in her sleep, hand resting protectively over her stomach. For the first time in years, the penthouse felt like a home, not because of its walls or wealth, but because of the fragile hope that now lived within them. When power meets love, one must fall. Ask yourself, which one rules your heart? Don't scroll past this moment. Subscribe now and remember, sometimes surrender is the bravest thing we ever do. The storm had rolled in quietly that night, soft thunder, distant rain, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Inside the hospital room, everything was a blur of motion and sound, beeping monitors, hushed voices, the sterile scent of fear and hope mingling together. Catherine's fingers clenched around Ramsey's hand as another contraction ripped through her. She didn't scream. She bit her lip, eyes burning, her strength fierce even in agony. Ramsey, in his pressed shirt and trembling hands, looked nothing like the man who once signed contracts with ice in his veins. His tie hung loose, his composure gone. He whispered words he never thought he'd say, prayers without names. "It's okay," he murmured, brushing sweat-damp hair from her forehead. "You're almost there. Just breathe, Catherine. Please, breathe." She turned her face toward him, her voice breaking. "Don't tell me to breathe, Garcia. You're the reason I'm here." He laughed softly through the panic. pressing her hand to his lips. "Then I'll stay, until your last breath if I have to." Tears slipped from her eyes, but this time, they weren't from pain. Minutes felt like hours. Then, a cry. The sound pierced the air like light splitting darkness. A nurse lifted a small wriggling form into the world, fragile, alive, loud. Catherine's chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. She turned weakly toward Ramsay, her eyes searching his face. The nurse placed the baby in his arms. Ramsay froze. The world went still. The child was impossibly small, his fists curled tight, his cry fading into soft whimpers. Ramsay's vision blurred as warmth rushed up his throat. He had never felt anything like it, not pride, not power. Something purer. Something terrifyingly human. He looked down and whispered, "You gave me more than an heir, Catherine." His voice cracked. "You gave me a reason to live." Hours later, the chaos settled into quiet. Catherine slept, exhaustion written across her face. Ramsay sat by her bedside, the baby asleep in his arms. The rhythm of the child's breathing steadied him more than any deal, any empire, ever could. He thought of his past, the boardrooms, the greed, the endless hunger to win, and realized how small it all was compared to this moment. He reached for Catherine's hand. "You saved me," he whispered. "You didn't even mean to, but you did." She stirred slightly, her lips curving in a faint, drowsy smile. 2 months later. Sunlight flooded the grand conference hall of Garcia Industries. The polished table gleamed beneath the glass ceiling, and rows of executives sat in tense silence. At the head of the table stood Ramsay Garcia, not the ruthless CEO of legend, but a man reborn. He placed a file on the table, titled the Roy Foundation for Lost Children. "This," he began, his voice calm and clear, "is what matters now." He explained the vision, a charity built to protect children who had lost their families, to fund homes, education, and medical care. Every cent of the startup capital came from his personal assets. "This foundation," he continued, "is named for the man who believed in hope, and the woman who taught me how to find it again." The room erupted into applause. Some clapped out of loyalty, others out of shock. But Ramsay didn't care. For once, the applause wasn't for power. It was for purpose. After the meeting, he found Catherine waiting in the hallway, dressed simply, holding their baby in her arms. He smiled softly. "You came." "I had to see it to believe it," she teased. He chuckled, slipping a finger into the baby's tiny hand. "You doubted me?" "I doubted the man you used to be," she said gently. "But not this one." He met her gaze. "That man died the day I met you." Catherine looked down, her eyes shining. "Don't say that. Just say you started living." He smiled, not the practiced grin of a billionaire, but something real, warm, almost shy. That afternoon, the two of them stood in front of the newly unveiled plaque at the Foundation's headquarters. The Roy Foundation for Lost Children, founded in honor of Richard Roy, and every dream worth rebuilding. Catherine traced the letters with trembling fingers. Her father's name gleamed in the sunlight, etched into history. She turned to Ramsay, eyes glistening. He would have been proud. "He should be," Ramsay said softly. "You're everything he wanted to be." She blinked fast, a tear slipping down. "You rebuilt what your world destroyed." He nodded, his voice quiet. "And you rebuilt me." That night, back at their home, Catherine stood on the balcony, cradling their son. The city stretched before her, alive, bright, endless. Ramsay joined her, wrapping his arm gently around her shoulders. "Do you ever think about how strange it all is?" she asked. "How pain and love can come from the same place?" He smiled faintly. "I used to think love was a weakness. Now I think it's the only thing that ever makes us strong." She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind carried the faint sounds of the city, laughter, music, life, and beneath it all, the steady rhythm of two hearts learning to beat together. When their son stirred, Catherine looked down at him and whispered, "He has your eyes." Ramsay laughed softly. "Poor kid." "Don't say that," she smiled. "You finally see the world differently now. Maybe he will too." Ramsay kissed the top of her head. "Maybe he'll see the world the way you do, with grace." Her voice softened. "Grace doesn't come easy, Ramsay. It comes from breaking first." He nodded. "Then maybe we had to shatter to deserve this." The night deepened. City lights shimmered across their faces as they stood quietly on the balcony. A man once driven by greed, a woman once consumed by vengeance, now holding everything they never knew they needed. And for the first time, Ramsay Garcia didn't feel like a man who had conquered the world. He felt like a man who had finally come home. If this moment doesn't move you, your heart's already half stone. Subscribe now, because stories like this remind us it's never too late to start over. The first light of dawn spilled gently across the horizon, washing the city in a soft, golden haze. From the penthouse balcony, the world below seemed peaceful, distant cars like whispers, skyscrapers like silent sentinels rising to greet the sun. Catherine stood barefoot, wrapped in a loose white robe, their baby nestled against her chest. The small boy stirred, blinking sleepily as sunlight brushed his cheek. Ramsay joined her quietly, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. He'd woken early, restless but grateful, the kind of morning where silence carried more meaning than words ever could. He watched her for a moment, the way her hair glowed in the dawn, the way she held their child as if nothing else existed. There was a stillness about her, not fragile but sacred. Catherine smiled when she noticed him watching. "You're staring," she murmured. "Can you blame me?" he said softly. "It's the first morning I've ever woken up and felt full." She raised a brow. "Full." He nodded, stepping closer, slipping one arm around her waist. "For years I thought money built empires," he said, his voice low, the words rolling like a confession. "But I was wrong. It builds walls." Catherine tilted her head toward him, her voice a whisper. "And love breaks them." Their eyes met, two souls that had once stood on opposite sides of the same wound. Now, in the quiet glow of a new day, they were no longer enemies, not even survivors. They were simply whole. Ramsay reached out and touched his son's small hand. The baby's fingers curled instinctively around his father's finger, tiny and firm. It stole his breath. "I used to think legacy meant power," he said. "Buildings. Companies. My name on towers." Catherine looked up at him, smiling softly. "And now I know legacy looks more like this," he whispered, nodding toward their child. Small hands. Honest eyes. A heart unspoiled by greed. She rested her head against his chest. "You've changed, Ramsay." He smiled faintly. "You did that." "No," she said, shaking her head gently. "Love did that. We just stopped fighting it." The sun climbed higher, casting streaks of orange and rose over the city skyline. For a long while, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence was no longer heavy. It was warm, full of shared understanding. Down below, life began to stir, cars honking, people rushing to work, another day of endless ambition. Up here, though, time seemed to pause, stretching between heartbeats and the soft coos of their newborn. Catherine brushed her lips against the baby's forehead. "Do you ever think about what he'll become?" Ramsay's gaze followed hers. "Every day. I just hope he grows up knowing love before he learns ambition." She smiled wistfully. "Maybe that's the real inheritance. Not money, not influence. Just goodness." He nodded. "And choice. The choice to live differently than we did." A breeze drifted through the open balcony doors, rustling the white curtains like soft waves. The scent of fresh rain lingered in the air, sweet and clean, the smell of beginnings. Ramsay placed his coffee cup down and turned to face Catherine fully. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous," she teased, and he chuckled. "About us," he continued. "About what's next." She raised an eyebrow. "You're not building another empire, are you?" "Maybe," he said, "but not the kind made of glass and concrete." She watched him curiously. "I want to build something different," he said. "A life. With you. With him." Catherine blinked, emotion catching in her throat. "You already are." They stood in silence again, but this time it felt like music, the rhythm of their breaths, the soft rustle of the city, the slow unfurling of dawn. Ramsay reached for her free hand, fingers interlacing with hers. "Do you ever regret saying yes?" he asked quietly. She looked at him for a long moment before replying. "No," she said, "because that yes was never about money. It was about faith in what we might still become." He smiled. "And what did we become?" "Human," she said simply. He laughed softly, his voice breaking with emotion. "Then I guess that's the best deal I ever made." Inside, the baby let out a small cry, soft but insistent. Catherine rocked him gently, humming under her breath. Ramsay watched her with a kind of reverence, his heart swelling. He had seen beauty before, luxury, art, wealth, but nothing compared to this. Not her perfection, but her peace. She looked up at him through the morning light, eyes warm. "You know," she said, "I think your father would have been proud." Ramsay's smile faded slightly, replaced by quiet reflection. "Maybe. I just hope he'd understand that I finally learned what all his lessons were really about." "Which is?" He glanced toward the baby, then back to her. "That wealth means nothing until you use it to heal." Catherine nodded, eyes glistening. "Then maybe this is our redemption, not the money, not the charity, but us. Learning how to love after forgetting what it meant." The city was fully awake now, sunlight reflecting off mirrored towers. The world would soon demand their attention again. Meetings, responsibilities, headlines. But for now, none of that mattered. For now, they were just Ramsay and Catherine. A man who'd once tried to buy his legacy. A woman who'd once tried to destroy it. Both reborn by a choice neither of them had planned, but both had needed. Ramsay looked down at their child again and whispered almost to himself, "Sometimes I still can't believe you're real." Catherine smiled. "He's proof that even broken things can grow." He wrapped his arm around her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And so are we." They stood there together, watching as the morning light spilled fully across the city, soft, golden, forgiving. Two broken souls, rebuilt by truth and grace. Sometimes the greatest deals are the ones we break, and the richest people are those who finally learn to give without counting.